The Galactic Council chambers had seen many debates over the millennia. Wars declared, peace treaties signed, entire civilizations welcomed into the fold. But today's emergency session had been called for something far more urgent, apparently. The primitive habits of species 7834, otherwise known as humans. Ambassador Klaxon adjusted his iridescent feathers and cleared his throat with the sound of a dying bagpipe. As representative of the Avian Supremacy Coalition, he took great pride in his species' intellectual superiority. After all, they had achieved faster than light travel while humans were still figuring out fire. Well, that wasn't entirely accurate, but close enough for his ego. Fellow beings, Klaxon announced, his voice carrying the pompous tone of someone who had never worked a day in his life. We are here to address a concerning development on Earth. Our surveillance teams report that 92% of human adults consume a bitter brown liquid multiple times daily. They call it coffee. A collective gasp rippled through the chamber. Admiral Grothrax, whose species resembled what would happen if a praying mantis hit the gym for 10 years straight, clicked his mandibles in disgust. This is worse than we thought. They're clearly suffering from a planetary addiction crisis. Precisely. Klaxon squawked, pleased to have support. Our xenobiologists confirm this substance provides minimal nutritional value and causes dependency symptoms when discontinued. Yet humans base their entire daily schedules around consuming it. Dr. Whiskers, the lone representative from the Feline Research Collective, twitched her whiskers thoughtfully. Unlike her colleagues, she actually studied other species instead of just judging them. Have we considered that perhaps there's a reason for this widespread adoption? Humans aren't typically prone to mass delusions. Grothrax scoffed, a sound like grinding metal. Doctor, with respect to your scientific background, humans still use primitive projectile weapons and combustion engines. Their judgment is questionable at best. Indeed, Klaxon continued, spreading his wings dramatically. While we have evolved beyond such crude stimulants, relying instead on our superior Zorblex Energy Crystals and plasma meditation pods, these humans poison themselves daily with this crude plant extract. The chamber murmured agreement. The Zorblex crystals were indeed the pinnacle of civilized energy enhancement. A single crystal could provide mental clarity for weeks without the messy biological dependencies that plague lesser species. What troubles me most, Klaxon went on, is that humans have begun requesting coffee shipments to their off-world colonies. This addiction is spreading beyond their home planet. Soon, they'll be contaminating other species with their primitive habits. This was completely untrue, but Klaxon had never let facts interfere with a good speech. Admiral Grothrax stood, his towering frame casting shadows across the chamber. The solution is obvious. We intervene. We replace their toxic brown liquid with proper galactic standard stimulants. Consider it a humanitarian mission. Precisely what I was thinking. Klaxon nodded sagely. We'll start with their largest coffee distribution center. Once we demonstrate the superiority of civilized alternatives, they'll abandon this barbaric practice immediately. Dr. Whiskers raised a paw. Shouldn't we study their coffee first? Understand why they're so attached to it? Forcing change on a species without understanding their motivations has historically led to complications. Dr. Klaxon replied with the patience of someone explaining fire safety to a child. Sometimes a primitive species simply needs guidance from their betters. We're not going to waste valuable research time on a simple addiction crisis. The vote was unanimous. Well, except for Dr. Whiskers. But she was outvoted by the overwhelming smugness of her colleagues. Within hours, the intervention fleet was assembled and heading toward Earth's primary coffee hub. As the ships departed, Klaxon settled back in his ornate perch, quite pleased with himself. Another species saved from their own primitive instincts. The Avian Supremacy Coalition's reputation for benevolent guidance would only grow stronger. He had no idea he had just made the biggest mistake in galactic history. The Cosmic Bean headquarters in Seattle looked exactly like what would happen if Starbucks had unlimited funding and a serious caffeine addiction. The 40-story chrome and glass structure housed everything from bean research laboratories to experimental brewing facilities. It was, without question, the beating heart of Earth's coffee empire. Jake Morrison stood behind the main counter on the ground floor, looking like he hadn't slept in 3 days. Which, to be fair, he hadn't. As head barista and lead coffee scientist for Cosmic Bean, Jake lived on approximately 4 hours of sleep and 6 cups of coffee per day. His hair defied several laws of physics. His lab coat was stained with coffee rings that told the story of countless late-night experiments, and his eyes had the slightly manic gleam of someone who had achieved perfect caffeine equilibrium. "Double-shot cortado with oat milk and a hint of vanilla," he called out, sliding the cup across the counter with practiced precision. "Next." That's when the ceiling exploded. Not literally exploded, more like politely disintegrated as 3 sleek alien vessels descended through the opening with all the subtlety of a mariachi band at a funeral. The lead ship extended a boarding ramp, and out walked Ambassador Klaxon in all his feathered glory, followed by Admiral Grothrax and a squad of insectoid soldiers. The coffee shop fell silent except for the gentle hiss of espresso machines. A few customers pulled out phones to record, because apparently, first contact with alien civilizations was now a TikTok moment. "Greetings, primitive humans," Klaxon announced, his voice carrying across the stunned cafe. "We are representatives of the Galactic Council, here to liberate you from your tragic addiction to this harmful substance." Jake blinked slowly, processed the situation, and did what any reasonable person would do when faced with condescending aliens interrupting the morning rush. He poured himself another shot of espresso and downed it. "Okay," Jake said, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "Let me get this straight. You're here to save us from coffee?" "Precisely." Grothrax stepped forward, his mandibles clicking with authority. "We have superior alternatives that will free your species from this primitive dependency." Jake looked around the cafe at his customers, who were still filming this cosmic intervention with their phones. Did anyone call for alien coffee intervention? No? Yeah, me neither. Klaxon ruffled his feathers impatiently. "Young human, you clearly don't understand the severity of your situation. Your entire species is enslaved by this bitter liquid. We're here to help." "Enslaved?" Jake laughed, a sound somewhere between amusement and sleep-deprived hysteria. "Buddy, I've got news for you. We're not enslaved by coffee. We're enhanced by it." Admiral Grothrax signaled his soldiers, who began removing gleaming crystals from specialized containers. "These are Zorblex Energy Crystals, the most advanced stimulants in the galaxy. One crystal provides weeks of mental clarity without biological dependency." "Weeks?" Jake's eye twitched. "What if I need mental clarity right now? What if I need it in 5 minutes when I have to present my quarterly coffee innovation report to the board? What if I need it at 3 in the morning when inspiration strikes?" "The crystals work on a more civilized schedule," Klaxon explained condescendingly. "You simply wouldn't need stimulation at such irregular hours if you organized your life properly." Jake stared at the alien ambassador for a long moment, then slowly turned to his espresso machine. He pulled a perfect shot, the golden crema forming like a work of art. The rich aroma filled the air as he took a sip, savoring the complex flavors that had been perfected over centuries of human innovation. "Let me explain something to you, Feather Boy," Jake said, his voice carrying the dangerous calm of a man who had been insulted in his own coffee shop. "Coffee isn't just a drink. It's culture. It's ritual. It's the fuel that runs human civilization. You want to take away our coffee? You might as well ask us to stop being human." "That's exactly the primitive thinking we're here to correct," Klaxon replied smoothly. "Within 48 hours, we'll have replaced every coffee source on your planet with proper Zorblex distribution centers. Your species will thank us once the withdrawal symptoms subside." The words hung in the air like the threat they were meant to be. Jake set down his cup very carefully, the way someone might set down a weapon before a duel. "Withdrawal symptoms?" he repeated softly. "Nothing too severe," Grothrax assured him. "Mild headaches, fatigue, irritability, complete inability to function. Standard detoxification effects." Jake looked around at his customers, his fellow coffee scientists, his life's work surrounding him in chrome and glass. When he turned back to the aliens, His smile was the kind that made sharks nervous. "You know what?" Jake said pleasantly. "Go ahead. Try it." 48 hours later, human civilization had effectively ended. It started small. Office workers staring blankly at their computers, unable to remember how to send emails. College students falling asleep during exams they'd studied months for. Night shift nurses walking into walls because their depth perception had mysteriously vanished along with their caffeine supply. By hour 36, the stock market had closed indefinitely because no one could remember how numbers worked. By hour 40, air traffic controllers had grounded all flights after one controller spent 20 minutes trying to figure out which button turned on his radio. Jake Morrison, now operating out of an abandoned subway tunnel with a handful of fellow coffee resistance fighters, surveyed the chaos through a stolen alien surveillance feed. Above ground, Ambassador Klaxon was attempting to hold a press conference to explain why the Zorblex crystals weren't having the expected effect. The problem, Jake explained to his ragtag group of baristas, coffee shop owners, and one very confused alien intern who'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time, is that they completely misunderstood human physiology. His lieutenant, a former Starbucks district manager named Rodriguez, nodded grimly. They thought we were addicted. They didn't realize we had evolved. This was only slightly dramatic, but it wasn't entirely wrong. Humans had been consuming caffeine for thousands of years. Their brains had adapted, their neural pathways had optimized around regular caffeine intake. Removing it wasn't like breaking an addiction. It was like removing a fundamental part of human brain chemistry. "Sir," called out Jenny, a chemistry PhD who'd been working on synthetic caffeine alternatives before the invasion. "I'm getting reports from hospitals worldwide. Emergency rooms are packed with people suffering from what doctors are calling acute caffeine deficiency syndrome." "Symptoms?" Jake asked, though he was pretty sure he knew. "Severe headaches, inability to process complex thoughts, motor function impairment, and complete loss of motivation. Basically, humans are reverting to a pre-coffee state of consciousness." Jake rubbed his temples, fighting his own caffeine withdrawal headache. The resistance had managed to salvage a few pounds of coffee beans, but they were rationing them carefully. 1 cup per person per day, and only for essential personnel. Meanwhile, in the Galactic Council emergency session happening 3 miles above Seattle, Ambassador Klaxon was discovering that his brilliant intervention had some unexpected side effects. "What do you mean the humans have stopped responding to communications?" Admiral Grothrax demanded, his mandibles clicking with increasing agitation. "They're not answering phones, emails, or even basic radio transmissions," reported Captain Buzz, a bee-like alien who handled Earth communications. "The few responses we've received consist mainly of requests for bean juice and offers to trade entire cities for just 1 cup of the good stuff." Dr. Whiskers, who had been suspiciously quiet during the crisis, cleared her throat delicately. "Perhaps I should mention that I've been monitoring human brain activity since the coffee removal began." "And?" Klaxon snapped, his feathers ruffling with stress. "Their cognitive function has decreased by approximately 70%. Problem-solving abilities, memory formation, even basic motor skills are severely impaired. It's as if we've chemically lobotomized an entire species." The chamber fell silent except for the nervous buzzing of Captain Buzz's wings. "That's impossible," Grothrax protested. "No species could be that dependent on a simple plant extract." "I'm afraid the evidence suggests otherwise," Dr. Whiskers continued. "More troubling, our trade agreements with humanity have completely collapsed. The Andromedans are furious about missing shipments of human technology. The Centauri Collective is threatening to cut off our dilithium supply if we don't fix the human productivity crisis immediately." Klaxon felt a cold dread settling in his stomach. How much of our economy depends on human trade partnerships? "Approximately 43%. Captain Buzz replied miserably. "Humans are remarkably innovative when properly caffeinated. Without coffee, they've essentially become a species of very tall, confused monkeys." Back in the subway tunnel, Jake was receiving reports from resistance cells worldwide. The situation was getting desperate. Governments were offering massive bounties for black market coffee. Scientists were attempting to synthesize caffeine from household chemicals with predictably disastrous results. One group in Brazil had tried to brew coffee from tree bark and mushrooms, creating what could only be described as hallucinogenic mud. Jake Rodriguez said, holding up his radio, "I'm getting a transmission from the alien ships. They want to negotiate." Jake took the radio, his hand trembling slightly from caffeine withdrawal. "This is Jake Morrison of the Human Coffee Resistance. What do you want?" Ambassador Klaxon's voice crackled through the static. "Mr. Morrison, we may have made a slight miscalculation regarding your species' relationship with caffeine." "You think?" Jake replied, his sarcasm cutting through the radio waves like a rusty knife. "We're prepared to discuss the gradual reintroduction of coffee in exchange for your cooperation in restoring normal human function." Jake looked around at his fellow resistance fighters, all of them running on fumes and sheer stubborn determination. Above ground, human civilization was crumbling, because a bunch of pompous aliens had decided they knew what was best for Earth. "Tell you what, bird brain," Jake said into the radio, "keep your crystals. We'll keep our coffee. And maybe next time, don't mess with a species' brain chemistry unless you understand what you're doing." The radio fell silent. But Jake had a feeling this conversation was far from over. Dr. Whiskers had always been the curious type. It was both her greatest strength as a scientist and, according to her colleagues, her most dangerous flaw. While Ambassador Klaxon and Admiral Grothrax argued about damage control strategies, she found herself staring at the coffee sample she'd secretly collected from the cosmic being before its destruction. The small glass vial contained maybe 2 ounces of the mysterious brown liquid that had apparently turned an entire species into functional addicts. Her scientific instincts were screaming at her to analyze it properly, but something else, something deeper, was whispering that analysis alone wouldn't be enough. She needed to understand it experientially. "Absolutely not," she muttered to herself, pacing around her private laboratory aboard the research vessel. "That would be completely unethical. Dangerous. Stupid, even." She picked up the vial and held it up to the light. The liquid was dark, almost black, with an oily sheen that suggested complex chemical compounds. The aroma was rich and earthy, with hints of chocolate and something her feline nose couldn't quite identify. "Just a small taste," she reasoned aloud. "For science. How else can I understand the human response without experiencing it myself?" This was how most scientific disasters began, but Dr. Whiskers had never been one to let common sense interfere with research. She carefully poured a small amount into a beaker, approximately what humans would call a shot, and stared at it for several minutes. Her species had highly efficient metabolisms. If caffeine affected humans this dramatically, surely a small amount would be manageable for a feline research collective member. Dr. Whiskers lifted the beaker to her lips and took a careful sip. The first thing that hit her was the taste, bitter, complex, with layers of flavor that seemed to unfold across her palate like a symphony. The second thing was the immediate warming sensation as the liquid traveled down her throat. The third thing was the sudden, overwhelming realization that she could see everything. Not literally see everything, of course, but her mind, which had always been sharp, suddenly felt like it had been upgraded with quantum processors. Problems that had puzzled her for months suddenly had obvious solutions. Research papers she'd been struggling to write began composing themselves in her head with perfect clarity. "Oh," she whispered, setting down the empty beaker with trembling paws. "Oh my." Within 20 minutes, Dr. Whiskers had solved 3 major theoretical physics problems, redesigned the ship's waste recycling system for optimal efficiency, and composed a symphony in her head that she was pretty sure would revolutionize feline musical theory. Within an hour, she was pacing frantically around her lab, talking to herself at approximately twice her normal speed, while simultaneously working on 4 different projects. "The humans weren't addicted," she muttered, rapidly scrawling equations across every available surface. "They were optimized. This substance doesn't just provide energy, it enhances cognitive function exponentially. No wonder their productivity collapsed when we removed it. It would be like removing our primary sensory organs." She paused mid-pace, struck by a terrifying thought. The effects were already starting to fade. The incredible mental clarity was dimming, and she could feel her enhanced cognitive state slipping away like water through her claws. "No, no, no," she whispered, staring at the nearly empty coffee vial. "I need more." "Non-lie." This was when Dr. Whiskers realized she had made a terrible mistake. Not in trying the coffee exactly, but in assuming that one small taste would be enough for proper scientific analysis. Over the next several hours, she consumed the rest of the coffee sample in carefully measured doses, documenting her enhanced mental state with obsessive precision. Each sip brought back the incredible clarity, the sense that she could understand the fundamental workings of the universe if she just focused hard enough. By the time her research shift ended, Dr. Whiskers had made more scientific breakthroughs than in the previous 5 years combined. She had also developed what could only be described as an intense professional interest in acquiring more coffee samples. For research purposes, she told herself firmly as she began planning an unauthorized trip to Earth's surface. The next morning, Captain Buzz found her in the ship's botanical lab, attempting to grow coffee plants from beans she'd somehow acquired during her research expedition. "Dr. Whiskers," he buzzed nervously, "the ambassador has been looking for you. Something about unauthorized planetary contact in violation of quarantine protocols." "Coffee," Dr. Whiskers replied without looking up from her improvised greenhouse. "I need more coffee for proper scientific analysis." "Ma'am, that's what I was afraid you'd say." Within days, Dr. Whiskers had become the galaxy's first non-human coffee addict. She was also, unfortunately, extremely convincing when she explained the benefits of caffeine to her fellow researchers. The substance enhanced mental acuity, improved problem-solving capabilities, and provided sustained energy without the crashes associated with traditional stimulants. Soon, half the research staff was sneaking down to Earth's surface for sample collection. The other half was attempting to synthesize caffeine in the ship's chemistry labs with varying degrees of success. Ambassador Klaxon, meanwhile, was dealing with increasingly frantic reports of his crew's strange behavior. Scientists working 18-hour days without fatigue, engineers redesigning ship systems with impossible efficiency, and all of them constantly requesting permission for additional research expeditions to the planet's surface. "What exactly is happening to my crew?" he demanded during an emergency staff meeting. Dr. Whiskers, who had been surviving on 3 hours of sleep and approximately 12 cups of coffee per day, looked up from the 17 research papers she was simultaneously writing. "Evolution," she said simply. "We're evolving." It was around this time that Admiral Grothrax began receiving reports of similar incidents aboard his military vessels. Soldiers were performing tactical exercises with unprecedented precision. Pilots were flying complex maneuvers they'd never attempted before. And everyone kept asking about acquiring more samples of the mysterious human beverage. The Galactic Council had intended to save humanity from coffee addiction. Instead, they were about to discover that coffee addiction was highly contagious. And Jake Morrison, still leading the resistance from his underground bunker, was starting to get some very interesting offers from unexpected sources. 6 months later, Jake Morrison sat in what used to be the United Nations General Assembly Hall, but was now the headquarters of the Galactic Coffee Trade Federation. The irony wasn't lost on him that humanity had achieved galactic political dominance through the same substance that aliens had tried to eliminate. Next, Jake called out, sipping his morning espresso as he reviewed the daily list of planetary coffee requests. Ambassador Klaxon shuffled forward, his once pristine feathers now disheveled and his eyes bloodshot. "Mr. Morrison, sir, the Avian Supremacy Coalition is experiencing severe productivity losses without our daily coffee allocation." Jake pretended to consult his tablet. "Let's see. Didn't you call coffee a primitive addiction about 6 months ago?" "That was before we understood its remarkable benefits," Klaxon replied desperately. "Our cognitive enhancement rates have increased 400% since implementing regular caffeine consumption. Our scientists are making breakthroughs daily." Jake made a note on his tablet. "And what happened to those superior Zorblex crystals you were so excited about?" Klaxon's feathers drooped. "We've repurposed the crystals as decorative elements in our coffee shops." The transformation had been swift and merciless. What started with Dr. Whisker's unauthorized research had spread through the alien fleets like a highly caffeinated wildfire. Within weeks, entire crew complements were experiencing withdrawal symptoms whenever their coffee supplies ran low. Within months, they were building interstellar supply chains dedicated to importing human coffee to their home planets. Admiral Grothrax, who now managed the galaxy's largest coffee distribution network, approached the desk next. His military bearing had been replaced by the frantic energy of someone who discovered that espresso shots could turn a regular Tuesday into a day of unprecedented tactical innovation. "Jake, my friend," Grothrax buzzed, his mandibles clicking nervously. "The insectoid military coalition needs to discuss increasing our monthly coffee imports." "By how much?" Jake asked, already knowing the answer would be ridiculous. 3,000%. Jake nearly choked on his coffee. 3,000? What are you people doing with it? "Well," Grothrax shifted uncomfortably, "we may have introduced it to our military academies, and our research facilities, and our general population, and possibly distributed it to our allied species as a diplomatic gesture." This was the problem with introducing an advanced cognitive enhancer to civilizations that had never developed tolerance for it. Humans had spent millennia building up their caffeine resistance. Aliens apparently had the caffeine tolerance of toddlers and the enthusiasm of teenagers with credit cards. The Centauri Collective is offering to trade their entire dilithium mining operation for exclusive coffee distribution rights, reported Jennifer Rodriguez, Jake's former resistance lieutenant who now served as Earth's Minister of Galactic Beverage Relations. "The Andromedans are threatening to declare war on the Centauri if they get exclusive rights," added Captain Miller, previously a Navy officer, now commanding Earth's coffee defense fleet. Jake leaned back in his chair, looking out at the line of alien ambassadors waiting to negotiate coffee contracts. Representatives from 47 different species, all of them showing various stages of caffeine dependency. Some were jittery and hyperactive from overconsumption. Others were clearly suffering withdrawal symptoms, displaying the telltale signs Jake had learned to recognize: drooping appendages, sluggish movement, and the desperate look of someone who would trade their starship for a decent cappuccino. "Sir," Rodriguez continued, "we're also getting reports that alien species are attempting to synthesize their own caffeine. The crystalline entities tried to create coffee-flavored crystals. The gaseous collective attempted to infuse their atmospheric processors with espresso essence." "Any success?" Jake asked, though he suspected he already knew. "The crystallines created what they describe as crunchy disappointment. The gaseous collective accidentally made their entire planet smell like burnt coffee for 3 weeks." Dr. Whiskers, who had become Earth's unofficial alien coffee consultant, approached the desk with her daily report. She looked healthy, well-rested, and significantly more focused than she had during her pre-coffee days. "Jake," she purred, "I've got updates from the research stations. Coffee consumption among alien species has increased by 2,000% across the galaxy. More importantly, their innovation rates are unprecedented. The Feline Research Collective alone has made more scientific breakthroughs in the past month than in the previous decade." "Any negative effects?" Jake asked, though he was starting to suspect that coffee might be the best thing that had ever happened to galactic civilization. "Some mild dependency issues," Dr. Whiskers admitted. "And there was an incident where a robotic collective unit attempted to inject espresso directly into their cooling systems." "Did it work?" "Surprisingly well, actually. They're requesting technical specifications for coffee-powered processors." Jake looked around the room at the chaos he'd accidentally created. Earth had gone from being a minor species on the galactic periphery to the center of interstellar trade, all because humans had figured out how to turn plant beans into liquid productivity enhancement. "You know what the really funny part is?" he said to Rodriguez as they watched Ambassador Klaxon desperately negotiate for emergency coffee shipments to prevent a collapse of avian civilization. "What's that, sir?" 6 months ago, they thought we were the primitive ones. The irony was delicious. almost as delicious as the perfectly brewed Ethiopian blend Jake was enjoying while literally the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy begged him for coffee privileges. Humanity had won the galactic lottery, and all it had taken was teaching everyone else about proper caffeine consumption. 1 year later, Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of Coffee Station Alpha, humanity's first orbital caffeine processing facility. Below him, Earth continued its daily rotation, but now it was the beating heart of an empire built entirely on coffee beans and cosmic irony. "Status report," he said into his comm unit, which was shaped like a coffee cup, because Jake had never lost his sense of humor about the situation. "All galactic trade routes are operating smoothly," came Rodriguez's voice. "The Zephyrian Confederation just placed an order for 50,000 tons of dark roast. The aquatic leagues want to discuss underwater coffee cultivation techniques. And the energy beings are asking if we can create a coffee that exists in pure wavelength form." Jake chuckled, sipping his morning espresso while watching alien cargo ships lined up in orbit like caffeinated ants. "Any problems?" "The usual. The crystalline entities are still trying to figure out how to drink liquid coffee without dissolving. The time travelers keep placing orders for coffee deliveries to last Tuesday. And Admiral Grothrax accidentally declared war on 3 systems because they served him decaf." "Understandable," Jake nodded. "What about the Galactic Council meeting?" "Rescheduled to Earth Standard Time, 9 a.m. Ambassador Klaxon insisted on the change because, quote, important decisions should only be made during proper coffee hours." This was the new reality. The entire galaxy now operated on human coffee schedules. Meetings were held during coffee-appropriate hours. Diplomatic negotiations included mandatory caffeine breaks. Several species had adopted human coffee shop terminology as part of their official languages. Jake walked over to his office wall, which displayed a galactic map showing coffee distribution networks in glowing green lines. Every major trade route, every important space station, every diplomatic hub was connected by the thin green threads of humanity's caffeinated web. "Computer, show me today's production numbers," he commanded. Earth is currently producing 47 million gallons of coffee per day for interplanetary export, but the AI responded in a voice that Jake had programmed to sound slightly caffeinated. "Alien consumption rates continue to increase by 12% monthly. Current projections suggest that within 5 years, coffee will be the galaxy's primary trade commodity." Jake smiled, remembering the day when aliens had tried to save humanity from its coffee addiction. Now, the Galactic Council met in a building shaped like a giant coffee mug. The Universal Translation Matrix had been updated to include 17 different words for espresso. 3 separate alien species had officially declared coffee to be a religious sacrament. "Sir," came another voice over the comm, "Dr. Whiskers is here for her daily briefing." "Send her in." Dr. Whiskers entered, carrying a tablet and what appeared to be a coffee cup designed specifically for feline anatomy. She looked remarkably well for someone who had single-handedly introduced an entire galaxy to caffeine addiction. "Jake, I've got the latest research data," she said, settling into her chair with practiced ease. "Coffee consumption among alien species has stabilized at approximately 400% above baseline. The good news is that productivity across all participating civilizations has increased exponentially. The less good news is that we've created 47 different species of coffee addicts. So, and the really interesting news?" Jake asked, because he'd learned that Dr. Whiskers always saved the best information for last. 3 different alien species have begun evolving caffeine processing organs. The insectoids are developing specialized stomachs for coffee digestion. The energy beings have learned to metabolize caffeine directly through their quantum matrices. And the plant people have figured out how to photosynthesize coffee. Jake nearly choked on his espresso. "They're evolving to process coffee more efficiently?" "Evolution is remarkably adaptable," Dr. Whiskers confirmed. "They give any species a significant survival advantage, and they'll develop biological systems to exploit it. Coffee enhances cognitive function, increases productivity, and improves social bonding. From an evolutionary standpoint, it's the perfect substance." A soft chime indicated an incoming transmission. Jake activated the holographic display. revealing Ambassador Klaxon's tired but determined face. "Jake, my friend," Klaxon said, his voice carrying the slightly manic energy of someone on his sixth cup of the morning, "I wanted to personally thank you for today's coffee shipment. The Avian Supremacy Coalition has just achieved faster-than-light communication breakthrough, entirely thanks to our enhanced caffeine protocols." "Just doing our part for galactic progress," Jake replied diplomatically. "I also wanted to apologize formally for our initial misunderstanding about coffee," Klaxon continued. "We clearly underestimated both the substance and your species' relationship with it." Jake leaned back in his chair, enjoying the moment. "So you're saying humans weren't quite as primitive as you initially thought?" "On the contrary," Klaxon said seriously, "we now realize that humans are the most advanced species in the galaxy. You discovered, refined, and perfected a cognitive enhancement substance so effective that it's revolutionizing civilization itself. We've gone from viewing coffee as a primitive addiction to recognizing it as the greatest technological advancement in galactic history." After the transmission ended, Jake sat quietly for a moment, watching the endless stream of alien ships coming and going from Earth's orbit. Each one carried precious cargo, coffee beans that would fuel the dreams and innovations of species across the galaxy. "Rodriguez," he said into his comm, "set up a meeting with the Earth Council. We need to discuss expansion plans." "More coffee production facilities?" she asked. "Bigger," Jake said, grinning. "I want to establish coffee cultivation programs on every habitable planet in the galaxy. If we're going to be the center of galactic civilization, we might as well do it properly." He took one final sip of his espresso, savoring the rich flavor that had accidentally conquered the universe. Outside his window, a crystalline entity ship was attempting to dock, probably to negotiate for coffee that could exist in solid form. Humanity had started as the galaxy's least impressive species, dependent on a simple plant extract for basic cognitive function. Now they were the galaxy's most essential species, providing that same extract to 47 different civilizations who couldn't imagine existing without it. The aliens had been right about one thing: humans were addicted to coffee. They just failed to realize that it was the best addiction in the universe. Jake Morrison, former barista turned galactic coffee emperor, finished his morning espresso and prepared for another day of running the most caffeinated civilization in cosmic history. Some days the irony was almost as satisfying as the coffee. Almost.